So, welcome to Bonnevaux. Yesterday at Mass on Palm Sunday we began the journey of Holy Week that we are happy here, our community here at Bonnevaux, to share with you in different ways this coming week, during this very difficult, but also in its own way, quite mysterious and meaningful time. We began yesterday on this really beautiful morning here at Bonnevaux, and we had a beautiful day. We were able to go out and enjoy the beauty of nature. The weather was perfect, and in the evening we thanked God for the gift of each other, being on this journey together in this place. And it made me think, do we have a right to be happy when there is so much suffering and so much anguish in the world at this moment? And I think that's a question that we should all ask. And for us, the answer is that we're not just enjoying this peace, this happiness of our rhythm of life for ourselves. We want to share it with others, and share it with you, and share it with those who need it. The gift that we have is not just a beautiful environment here, or beautiful weather yesterday, but the real gift we have here is a path, a spiritual path, a rhythm of life. The fact that carries us morning, midday, evening in our times of meditation. And that's really what we would like to share with you, those of you who already have this path, to strengthen it and deepen it, and for those of you who haven't had time in busy life, pre-corona life, to develop a rhythm of meditation, a spiritual practice. And what we're discovering, I think, is that without a spiritual practice built into our daily life, life becomes very unsustainable and very even meaningless. So that's what we would like to share with you and reflect upon ourselves and with you in this coming Holy Week. And Holy Week is an invitation to us to reflect deeply on the meaning and the direction of our life this week, this moment, this year, today. To come to understand where we are on our journey now. And in the midst of this corona crisis, this is an even more powerful an invitation. Because we all know how this crisis, which came over us unexpectedly and suddenly during Lent, that this crisis has already changed our personal lives, our plans, our expectations, our relationships, and our social life. And we know one thing, and that is life will not be the same afterwards. So I'm going to try to just help a little bit with this reflection in Holy Week. It needs to be a personal reflection. Each one of us has to take personal responsibility for this journey of self-awareness and self-knowledge. You can't do it for me, I can't do it for you. And yet, we need community. We need to be supported by the sharing and exchange that comes with others. These are the two ways of coming to that self-knowledge that transforms us. The self-knowledge that is the heart of the spiritual journey of life. The self-knowledge that leads us forward and helps to clear the blocks that paralyze us on that very difficult path of human development and growth. It's not easy. Yesterday, as I said, we offered thanks for a beautiful day. And beauty can coexist with suffering and even with death. What we saw yesterday was the importance, above all, of having a rhythm of life, a spiritual path, a practice that we can share with others, because we are not isolated beings. That's our true nature, is that we are connected. We are interdependent. Although we worship independence in our culture, in our atomized and individualistic consumer culture, where we all have our own unique password, our own unique numbers, our own unique secrets. Nevertheless, that isn't our true nature. We have to share that unique password of our identity. I was once with a student, and we were trying to connect on his computer, and he was on the other side of the room, and we were trying to connect to something, and having a bit of difficulty, and I said to him, "What's your password? I'll put your password in." And he froze, and he came over to the room, across the room, and said, "I'll do it." So I said, "Well, okay, what's the problem?" And he said, "I couldn't give my password to anyone. I couldn't give my password to anyone." And I said, "Well, you could always give it and then change it later." But that is a reflection of our sense of identity in the modern world. And it's something that community and meditation together help us to transcend. At the Mass yesterday, we reflected on the universality of this idea of what the Tibetan Buddhists call the Bodhisattva Way of Life. In other words, that on our own personal, particular journey, our spiritual journey, we make that journey with a very specific intention. And that intention is not just to come to our own personal, password-protected kind of fulfillment, not to have our own special key into the kingdom of heaven, but that specific intention is to share the fruits of that spiritual journey that we are and that we are on with others, in order to be able to help them and relieve their suffering. And that's what we here at Bonnevaux in our small way are trying to do. And what each meditator should be intending and committed to, sharing the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, fidelity, gentleness, self-control, sharing those fruits with others to relieve the pain of human existence. And there's a beautiful verse in the Shantideva work, the Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life. "May I be the medicine, the physician, and the nurse for the relief of the suffering of others." And those words express the mystery of Christ and the mystery of his redemptive suffering that we ponder and grow into in Holy Week. And there's a very specific meaning to that today, because we're conscious of how many physicians and nurses are sacrificing themselves by unbelievably immense dedication and hard work, but also often at the cost of their own health or their lives, to help others to stay healthy, and how important it is for them to stay healthy, and that their governments and their institutions help them protect themselves. So, today I'd like to look at one of the essential elements of human life that is opened up for us by a deep reflection on Holy Week. Holy Week illuminates the meaning of human life for us. And it's explicit in the first part of the story, which is the Last Supper. This is the element of what we could call human relationships and community. Human beings are the most socialized animals, primates. Maybe because there's safety in numbers, and maybe also because our babies, when they're newborn, are the most vulnerable and totally helpless of all newborn animals. They can't survive without total care, love and attention from their family, from the tribe. For whatever reason, it's out of this necessity for human solidarity, for society, for the community. It's out of this necessity that we come together instinctually, and in that coming together instinctively, it is not good for us to be alone, the Bible says, we come to a unique insight that characterizes us as a unique kind of animal. We come to an insight into the meaning of human relationship, to the joy of belonging and sharing, not only because it's convenient, because we get food, we get protected, because we have somewhere to sleep and shelter, not only for those obvious reasons, but something in itself shows us the meaning of relationship, the joy of belonging and sharing. And this is what enables us to transcend Adam's loneliness. Remember, in one of the accounts of the creation, when Adam is sitting in the Garden of Eden with everything he could possibly want, he is lonely. And even the animals and the beauty of nature and the benevolence of nature, even all of that cannot satisfy him. And so God creates relationship. Out of himself, he becomes capable of relationship. And the human family is born. So there's something within the instinctual gathering of human beings, simply for their own self-interest and protection, but there's something is born in that which transcends loneliness. I don't think animals are lonely, although maybe we do see loneliness in animals sometimes. But human beings, as we become more conscious, become more aware of the meaning of relationship, not only its functionality and its usefulness. And so we come to a glimpse of an ultimate destiny. The human being is on the way towards fulfillment. That the human existence is fulfilled as we become conscious of our relationship to that mysterious source of our existence. We can't look and observe beyond the horizon of our own creation. Just as in physics we can't look beyond the Big Bang. So we can't look beyond the moment of our own conception. But we know that we began, that we have a beginning, and there's an undeniable sense that we are related to that source. And we call that source God, who is both like us, just as we are like our parents, but also strangely unlike us. But we are deeply attracted to this source. And as civilization develops, as human consciousness matures, we become deeply attracted to this source, drawn to it, and by it. And we are drawn to it through our human relationships, through community. We need to belong in order to come home. We need to belong in order to know where we have come from and where we are going. In the Gospel of John, Jesus says on one occasion to those who were criticizing him, "I know where I have come from and I know where I am going." Well, each one of us needs to be able to say that from the same place of self-knowledge that Jesus spoke from. And we need each other at every level in order to come to that. We can't do it in isolation. We need human relationships. We need community, not only to survive, to protect ourselves, but in order to flourish, to be who we are meant to be. But, there's always the but. So the but is that human relationships and community are not easy. And often they are the source of the greatest pain in human existence. Human beings often feel torn between isolation and relationship. That's why psychologically we need constantly to be calibrating the optimum distance. And this is a tension that has to be faced and understood. And the Last Supper, the first moment in the story, helps us to face and understand it. We are drawn to relationship. But ego separation resists it. It pushes against the very union that we feel attracted to. The ego, of course, is only doing its job. The ego is there as a function in our psyche to help us to individuate. And that means also to separate. We have to separate in order to unite. In the same way at the Mass, we break the bread in order to enter into communion. So this separation is painful, and it will always leave a mark on us as we separate from family, as we separate from different phases in our life, when separation is forced upon us, as it often is today during this crisis, by social isolation or shutdown or the death of people we love. This is a forced separation. But also, just as a natural process of human development, we have to accept separation as part of the process of relationship. It feels very contradictory, and it is, but it can also be seen as a paradox of death and resurrection, which is the core meaning of Holy Week and the core meaning of the Gospel. So, the ego is responsible for our individuation through separation, always painful, but necessary. And of course, this creates human complexity. One obvious way in which human beings deal with this is codependence. So we half separate as we enter into a relationship, close, intimate relationship with someone, or with a group, or with the church, or with a nation or with an institution. We enter into union with it, but we don't individuate. And so we become codependent. And that means we are neither interdependent nor independent. So we get the worst of both worlds. And that means we are half alive. We're halfway to communion, halfway to being the person in that relationship that we are meant to be. And if you're halfway, you're neither here nor there. We are half alive, and we are not really present. Jesus said, "I have come to bring you life, life in all its fullness." And there isn't really any alternative. We are either half alive, or we are fully alive, or moving into fullness of life. And if we are not, we are stuck in misery and pain and suffering and the ego bardo realm, or we are in bliss. We are moving beyond that half-life into fullness of life. It's life or death. What isolates us? Well, in practical terms, as we know from living in families and in communities and looking at the papers and seeing how nations relate to each other and how companies compete with each other, we know that what isolates us are habits, states of mind, patterns of behavior that the ego develops in its work of separating us and allowing us to fulfill our own potential and our own gifts and so on. But in doing that, the ego develops and protects us through habits and patterns of behavior to protect our separate existence. And therefore, unless we transcend the ego, we will never come into relationship, into communion. We will never come into fullness of life. So the ego has to be transcended. And the word transcendence here is just a nice word for death. The ego has to die. Often these patterns develop very early in consciousness, perhaps in infancy, but perhaps even in the womb they begin. And we don't understand them, the very deep-rooted patterns in which the ego has tried to bring us to individuation, but where we get stuck, we simply get blocked. We get stuck in these patterns. Later we call them our personality. We call them our character. This is what I'm like. Well, it's true. It is our personality. It is our character. And it is what we're like. But, well, we have to get over it. We have to change. There has to be a metanoia. There has to be a conversion. If we don't change radically, we keep repeating the same patterns. Both individually, in our relationships, and globally. Look at the pattern of abuse that we are perpetuating in our relationship to the environment, to our own home, to our own environment. This is just bad habits that we've got into and we can't break. we have to deal with the consequences of these habits and patterns. And the first thing we have to do is to recognize them. Well, that comes with time and mistakes, and life teaches us. Unless we are really determined on a policy of complete denial and evasion, and that sometimes happens, we just run away and we keep running from the truth of ourselves. We can do that through addiction, we can do that through overwork, we can do that in all sorts of different ways. But if we are really committed to self-distraction, self-evasion, running away, then these patterns inevitably don't become fully recognized. If they're not fully recognized, we're not free from them, and they just keep on repeating until they bring about more misery and another disaster. And yet, it is in human relationships that we learn to recognize these patterns. And it's in community, above all, that we are able to show and teach each other how to get through them. That's the beauty of the wisdom of the rule of St. Benedict, for example. He's very uncompromising about facing these patterns within individuals and even in the community. He says if a community gets mastered by one of these negative patterns, then it has to be recognized, and somebody from the outside has to come in and put it right. But within the life of the community, he's constantly showing how individuals need to be helped, to be healed, to be forgiven, but also to be corrected and to be confronted with the patterns that they are repeating. Families do the same thing. That's the essence of child rearing, educating a child, to help that child to recognize and to be corrected from those painful patterns. So, how do we deal with this work of recognizing the patterns that we need to transcend? Well, we will deal with them, if we deal with them well, honestly, it will be painful. But if we deal with them badly, it will be more painful. So either way, it's going to hurt. And there's a lot of pain and a lot of suffering in the story of Holy Week. And we shouldn't deny that or forget that. The meaning of suffering is essential to the full flourishing of the human being. So, if we deal with it badly at a personal level, this work of facing our own ego separation, our own resistance, our own denial, what happens if we deal with it badly? We deal with it by self-rejection. We see these negative patterns and we don't like what we see. We don't like ourselves. We lose faith in ourselves. We even hate ourselves for being so messed up, for being such a failure, for being so inadequate. And therefore, we are unworthy of love. And we fall into this dark, self-rejecting, self-hating isolation towards ourselves. The basic relationship, our relationship with ourselves, is poisoned and corrupted. And as long as that remains the case, as long as we have not received the medicine of love that overcomes this poison, of self-hatred and self-rejection and self-disgust, then we will remain in the prison of the ego and unable to be open to the gift of life. So that's a bad way of dealing with it ourselves. But how do we deal with it in others? Because of course we see it in others too. We're very ready to see the faults in others more than we do in ourselves. Anyone who lives in a family, lives in a community, is very conscious of this. People really piss us off. They get under our skin. We just don't like certain characteristics that they have, or ways of relating. That may change from day to day, but we have to learn how to deal with this force of the ego in others as well as in ourselves. In fact, we have to deal with it in both aspects of our capacity for human relationship, our relationship with ourselves, our relationship with others. So towards others, we have to deal with, we often deal with the ego pattern of self-isolation. We see somebody acting insensitively, people hurt us, people annoy us, people irritate us, and we deal with it by blame, by accusation, either in our own minds or angrily by blaming them. Even with hatred, by condemnation. And this is something that the Last Supper exposes for us, of all places. It shows us how we also deal with it in others by betrayal. So the Last Supper is this beautiful moment in the Christian story, in the Holy Week, where Jesus shows the depth of his love, that he is giving himself as the medicine, as the physician, as the nurse for humanity, for the healing of humanity. This is my body, this is my blood. I'm giving myself fully to you and sharing everything I am and know with you. So this is the great communion, the Holy Communion that we celebrate in the Eucharist. But at the heart of this beautiful moment is this dark ray of the black hole, which is the betrayal. So listen to how St. John describes it. After saying this, Jesus exclaimed in deep agitation of spirit, "One of you is going to betray me." The disciples looked at one another in bewilderment. Whom could he be speaking about? One of them, the disciple he loved, was reclining close beside Jesus. They were all lying on the ground in Middle Eastern fashion. So Simon Peter nodded to him and said, Ask who he means. Then that disciple, John, as he reclined, leaned back, close to Jesus, and asked, "Lord, who is it?" And Jesus replied, "It is the man to whom I give this piece of bread when I had dipped it in the dish." Then, after dipping it in the dish, he took it out and gave it to Judas, son of Simon Iscariot. As soon as Judas had received it, Satan entered him. Jesus said to him, "Do quickly what you have to do." No one at the table understood what he meant by this. As soon as Judas had received the bread, he went out. It was night. So, not a nice way to end your last meal with your friends. In human relationships, community is the school and the playground of human relationships. We move in one of two directions. There's no other way. We have to go one way or the other. Towards God, communion and transcendence, or towards the devil, Satan. The word devil in Latin is diabolus, and it's directly related to the word division, separation, alienation. And this painful truth is what we hear in this story of the Last Supper. The parallel existence of the movement towards communion and towards diabolic division. It affects all human relationships, and nations, and regions, and families, and communities, and the relationship of two individuals. So the Last Supper is a very peculiar kind of meal. It's the Eucharist, this amazing sign and gift of self that Jesus transmits through this ancient ritual. At the same time, it exposes the elephant in the room of every human relationship, which is here the dark force in his own intimate network of relationships, the worst imaginable event, betrayal. One of you will betray me. Why does he say that? Why does he spoil the meal? Why does he turn the first Eucharist into something so dark? Because it has to be exposed. If it's not exposed, it just continues and the pattern repeats itself. This exposure of that dark ego force of separation that resists communion is truthful. It tells the truth, and the truth will set you free. Painful to tell the truth. No, don't do it now. Do it later. But this was the moment when it needed to be exposed, so that we could be free from it, understand it in ourselves, and not be controlled by it. And mysteriously, and it's an amazing piece of literature as well as whatever else it is, this exposure of that ego force is related, the ego force of Judas, whom Satan, division, the diabolic, the resistance to communion, Satan entered into Judas. But it is connected in the story to the disciple whom Jesus loved, with whom he was most intimate, the one who could never betray him. And here's a polarity at the heart of all human existence, human relationship, between faithful love and betrayal. And this is what makes the Last Supper so explosive, and why it reveals the meaning of the rest of Holy Week. This is like an explosion of light that reveals the elephant in the room, but also allows us to enter into the rest of this week and get the meaning of what is happening. Father John once said, when he was talking about education, Christian education, and he said, the purpose of Christian education is to prepare us for the experience of betrayal. And it was an amazing insight, wise understanding of what a Christian education should be. Because it is inevitable. Of course, betrayal is the word we give to what other people do to us. We usually just feel the consequences of that, and we often don't understand why. And what we don't understand, it's easy for us to blame. They let us down, they disappointed us, it didn't work out. It's the unforgivable sin that could condemn us to being victims of isolation in perpetuity. We are just the betrayed. Well, so then that's who we are, and we probably deserve it, and so on. But the wisdom of this story frees us from that mistake. If we remain locked into that state of betrayal and isolation, the ego has won. The dark force has mastered us. And we are in that state of half life, half alive, half dead. Of course, the other question is, how do we betray others? Well, we never betray others. It's others who betray us. If we do something that others regard as betrayal, we let them down, we disappoint them, then we justify that. We have our own way of understanding why we have to do this. But how does Jesus deal with it? In this strange exchange between him and Judas. He knows that Judas will betray him. Don't know how he knows that, that's another level of the story. But he knows that Judas will betray him. And he identifies him. He lets Judas know that he knows that this is going to happen. And he gives him that piece of bread which he had blessed and said, "This is my body." So what's he doing? You know, when I was brought up, and many of you as Catholics will remember, we were always nervous about going to communion in case you were in a state of sin. And if you were in a state of sin and you received communion, you know, God knows what would happen. A lightning bolt would come down and, you know, you'd be evaporated. So there was this fear, which is a complete negation of what the Eucharist is about. The Eucharist is for us when we're in a state of sin. It's the sick who need the medicine, the physician, the nurse. So Jesus gives himself in the bread, in the consecrated bread, to the person who he knows is going to betray him. And not only that, but he says, go and do what you have to do. If this is what it's going to be like, it has to be like this, okay? Do it. So what has Jesus done? You could say he's going to be betrayed, yes, but he is not allowing himself to be betrayed. He is not going to condemn or blame or reject or hate Judas. The strange thing is, this is the amazing thing of this story, how he has put into practice his own teaching to love those who will betray you, persecute you, hate you. Love your enemies. The strange thing is, of course, also that the gospel writers can't quite accept that, because they have to put the boot in and give Judas a kick. They have to demonize Judas. And I left out from that story, but I should have put it in, the line where John says Judas, it was in the Gospel of today, where Judas is called a thief, and he used to steal money from the common fund. So we don't know why Judas betrayed Jesus. Was it just for 30 pieces of silver? Well, that's a bit naive to think it was just that. We don't know why Judas betrayed Jesus, but it's essential to the story. And what's most essential to the story is how Jesus deals with the betrayer. And the gospel writers can't quite, I think, get it fully, although they do show Jesus remaining in communion with the person who betrays him. That's redemptive suffering. So, Jesus enters into that dark force. He is not just a victim. He insists on staying connected with Judas. There's no blame, no condemnation, no punishment. He has shown us the way to be fully human. Because to be fully human, we have to go fully into our capacity for relationship. And that entry into relationship will bring us into contact with the dark force of isolation, of separation, and therefore of betrayal. We will meet that force in human existence. He's shown us the way to be fully human, to embrace our enemies, to love those who betray us, not just by saying, "Oh, I forgive you, it's okay, let's forget it." No, it's much more than that. This is actually engaging with that dark force. He died for our sins is one of the ways we express that. He overcomes this dark force of ego isolation by entering into it and refusing to condemn it. So those of us during this medical health crisis that we're in, who are in isolation, this is maybe a time for us to reflect on the difference between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is that feeling of separation, being betrayed maybe by others, being betrayed by circumstances, by the state, by whatever. But solitude in Jesus is a solitary figure in Holy Week, because he has to go through this uniquely. But he is not isolated, he's not lonely. And so we, I think, during this time of enforced isolation, social isolation, where we have to connect through the internet or by phone, or waving at people when you're out for your exercise. So this is an opportunity for us, not one that we would like to have had, but maybe there's a grace, maybe there's a meaning in it, where we can see that difference between isolation and solitude. And that difference lies in ourselves. No one can give us that. We have to work our way into it, come into it ourselves. But we do it with the love of others. And how the love of others, our relationship with others, full of imperfections, nevertheless, that experience of community allows us to grow. And the other thing that we come to see, I think, in Holy Week is the importance of a teacher. We need a teacher, and the path is the teacher. The teacher is the path. Jesus said, I am the way. It's not just information he's giving us, or a pep talk, or good ideas, good sermon. He's actually with us, and he has been through it, and he's going through it with us. And it's in that sense, he is the way and the truth. So we need a teacher to help us, and this week reveals Jesus to us as a teacher that we can trust and believe in and trust absolutely. So wherever you are, as you listen to this first of our reflections on Holy Week, all of us here at Bonnevaux hope that you can feel connected to that teacher, and whatever you may believe, that that teacher is in your own experience. And we pray that this Holy Week, for you as for us, will be a time of grace and a time of growth. And we will look forward to being with you tomorrow.